Keynote in Kochi because of all the happenings over there. And in some ways, the speech I was going to give is redundant because you actually did what I'm going to talk about now, which is to create a community of cooperation. And I really want to thank you for holding all of that for everyone there. You did a fantastic job. Yes. I'm giving this to you as part of my thinking. It's not complete yet, but I'm also donating the video to the community of India to spread on the website in the hopes that it will do something as a call to action. So this story really starts because I travel around the world all the time giving TA, and so I have quite a sense of what's going on in our community, and some of that really worries me. So I started with TA 35 years ago, and in that time perhaps we were less and that made it easier, but I also see that in our community today people are more focused on the I, what's in it for me, closing off institutes, talking about their trainees as if they're your trainees. So I catch my colleagues often say they are my trainees. Where before perhaps my value system is when you are a leader in TA, you are not only a leader of your own institute, you are also a leader in the community. And that brings accountability and responsibility with it as well. It means we have to focus on we as well as on the I. It means it's not my trainee because it takes a village to raise a trainee. And we are all implicated in that. So the talk I really want to give is about my journey about thinking how to create a community of cooperation, not only within our TA community, but also in businesses, in everywhere we go. And I want to share with you some of my thinkings about what it means to be a community, but also what it takes to build a community. Part of that, as you can see there, is I believe we've not lived up to our promise. And that's a very sad thing to say, because I think especially now, if we look in the world today, we have all the technology, all the resources, all the knowledge we need to actually solve the big problems we have, but we don't do it. And the same thing goes for TA. TA really started out as a social psychiatry. What happened to social? So one of the things I know from my work as a business innovation consultant is that cooperation is more important than ever. And I actually see in business, we're going faster in business than in community work. So in business, we've known for quite some time now that it's almost impossible to innovate and to be sustainable without creating partnership. And all the businesses that actually function very well acknowledge that the best invented here syndrome is the worst thing you can do. The best invented here syndrome is the thing that will keep you from innovating. It will keep you from growing. So in business, we already know that partnerships are the key. We know that if I can't do it, you probably can, and we'll create a chain of cooperation which will help us change the business and change the world. My question is, why aren't we doing the same thing? One of the things I really took a long time to think about is, what does community mean? It's a very personal question to me as well, because one of the things I've struggled with as an expat moving country to country every 3 years is, what does it mean to belong? What does it mean to be part of a community? What is the meaning of home? And I know for many of you, TA is a home. So when I ask people, why do you do TA? Some of you might answer, because it's a good method. Some of you might say, because my clients understand the language. But if I ask you truthfully, most of you would say, I belong to TA because it changed my life. And that is what, in essence, would create our community. And when I think about the word of community, it really has to do with this belonging at a very, very, very deep level. And for me, it has three meanings. So I took the word belonging and I thought, what does it mean to me really? Because this is something I've struggled with my whole life, and I also think about it a lot as a professional. For me, belonging means three things. So the first is belonging means membership, right? So membership implies that you are at home, and that even if you are not there, when you think of that community, you go, oh, I can go home, right? That's part of what community is and belonging is. Partly, and this is important, belonging also creates a sense of ownership. If I say, this chair belongs to me, it implies that I own the chair. And I would argue that the reason in TA and in the rest of the world we're not working as communities enough is that we've forgotten that sense of the word belonging. Because the sense of the word belonging, to belong to, implies that you're not only an owner but also accountable. And to be accountable means that you're not only going for I, but you're also going for we. And you have a responsibility to nurture the community as well. Okay? The other thing I was thinking about is if we take the word belonging, it also means longing to be. And what does that mean in our community? I think all our values are based on this sense of we are able with TA to help people become who they are. And if there's anything that binds us, it's this possibility to create a language where people can actually be and become more of themselves. So as I was thinking of this keynote, I was thinking, okay, so what do we have to do to create a community where people not only feel like they're members, but also feel accountable and also fulfill this wish and this deep, deep longing we have of being? Okay? That makes sense. So as I'm an organizational TA person, so I've been a TSEA in the organizational field for 15 years. And for me, you know, I could use all the individual concepts in TA to explain, you know, what could we do to create more community, more belonging, more cooperation. But I actually think that knowledge of individual concepts is not enough to answer this question. We need systemic concepts to answer this question. And luckily, there is a whole field in TA that answers that. Byrne wrote a book called Structure and Dynamics of Groups and Organizations, which gives a lot of the answers. But the other people I've been turning to are systemic thinkers and more community builders. People like Peter Block, who actually wrote a book called Community. People like Robert Putnam, who wrote a book called Bowling Alone, which I deeply recommend. And people like John Gottman, who wrote things about couples therapy, the science of trust. These are the thinkers that have inspired me to think about, okay, if we want to create this community of belonging, where do we turn to? And what I came up with reading all this is actually when you create a community, you need to address 3 levels of development. Much the same as Eric Byrne described in his book, Structure and Dynamics. We work in structural level, we work in relational level, which he called interpersonal. And we work on a psychodynamic level to create community. These 3 things are linked together, of course. You cannot create a dynamic of cohesion without having a structure to carry that. You cannot build trust if you do not have a structure for it. We say in Holland, every river without banks becomes a puddle. And it's much the same thing when you're creating a community. If you only use concepts which will help you build relationship without thinking of the structure of relationship first, it will not be possible to create a community of belonging. So let's look at these three levels. So what do we mean by creating a structure? And it really is the order. This is my deep, profound belief as a systemic thinker within the TA community, is the order of building community is structure first, then relationship, and then cohesion or trust. So if we look at all these different structures and levels of creating community of belonging, what are we talking about? Well, when we talk about creating a structure of cohesion, really I go back to Eric Berne's thinking. And at the structural level, he talks about boundaries as a very important thing. We talk about boundaries. Actually, boundaries are methods of inclusion and exclusion. And the fact of the matter is, if you have no boundaries, intimacy is impossible. So then cooperation is impossible as well. So when we start to build communities of cooperation, one of the really important things is to create a major external boundary, which makes the difference between people who are in and people who are out. And to think about what is the boundary, the major internal boundary, who is the leadership and who is not. Though we live in a very democratic community, I think it is really important to state that the difference between leadership and membership is an important one to respect. The minute those boundaries are blurred, you will find a community that is torn by games and by distrust. It is in the setting of boundaries that you will create safety and cohesion. Actually, from all the research, we know that the clearer the boundaries, the more democratic the process. And I would ask you to hold that in your minds. When we talk about creating a structure of community, we not only talk about boundaries, but about roles and hierarchy. Roles are important. We talk about roles of leadership, roles of membership, roles of apparatus in TA. And hierarchy is also important, though we don't talk about it much. Because in our vocabulary of okayness, somehow we have started to think that hierarchy precludes okayness. And the opposite is actually true. The clearer the hierarchy, the more people are able to stay okay. The clearer the decision-making authority structure, the more people are able to stay okay. And I would ask you to hold that in your minds as well. When we talk about creating really a structure of community, a community of belonging and cooperation, we're talking about creating a structure of interdependence. And that is the first prerequisite for creating community. If people do not feel dependent one on the other, not in terms of relationship, but in terms of role, the community feeling gets lost. Creating a structure of interdependence means that if I get a bonus, you get it too. If you lose too. If you get your exam, you're happy too. But at a structural level, it also means that we recognize that actually at that level, we're not talking about a parent as a TSTA and a CTA as a child ego state. What we are talking about at the structural level is that we have a chain of supply and demand. Actually, TSTAs are suppliers to an association, and in return, the association offers services. TSTAs are not the parents of an association, I would argue. And if we start seeing it that way, it becomes much more possible to think in terms of structure and healthy hierarchies. What does that mean for us? It also means that we are able, as leader then, where it's clear, to manage the boundaries in such a way that innovation and cooperation is possible. In business terms, we know that as you open one boundary, you have to close another. If we are not clear about who's a member of our association, the leadership has to become more cohesive to manage that. As we close a membership boundary, the leadership can become more delegation. Yeah? It's the leadership task to determine how permeable our boundaries are. But when you are creating a community of cooperation and building that structure, the first thing is, it is very, very clear who the members and the leaders have to be. And there is a recognition of the interdependence between the roles. The second level of creating a community of cooperation is building a relationship. Byrne called it the interpersonal level. He talked at that level about group dynamics. Yeah. He talked about personas. Who are you in role? I talk about social ranking, which is kind of the relational level of hierarchy. It means how close or far are you to me? Yeah. And we talk not about power structures, but we talk about influencing structures. Mm-hmm. To create a community of cooperation, we know that geography or history or even great leadership is not the thing that makes the difference in a community. The thing that creates a healthy community of cooperation has to do with the quality of the relationship, where people trust that their success and safety depends on the success and safety of the other. And as soon as you lose that sense that my safety and success does not depend on yours, you are breaking the bonds of belonging in a community. If I am not well, you are not well. If you are well, I am well. If you are successful, I am happy, because as long as you are successful, I can be more successful. That is creating a relationship of community. And I found that you have a saying in India where you say that you cannot reach nirvana except if everybody else has gone before you. And that's the kind of community we're talking about, where you have a sense everybody else can go before me, and it's all right. Yeah? We know that to build this community of cooperation, you need to build a level of trust in a community. And we even know that there's a trust metric. John Gottman and his wife spend 45 years figuring out why relationships derail and why some relationships stay together. And in their last book, The Science of Trust, they talk about a trust metric. And this trust metric is very important for us as well if we want to create a community of belonging. We say trust is the intention to accept vulnerability based on the positive expectations or beliefs regarding the intentions of others. And I would argue that in our TA community today, we have lost that trust. People do not always speak well of other people in our community. People are jealous of other people's success. We do not always believe in the good intentions of others. I've been a member as vice president of the ITA board, as vice president of the IATA board. I've been president of the Dutch board. And one of the biggest things I've had to deal with is the lack of trust and the splitting that causes in our community. And I am worried. I am concerned. So Gottman goes even further, and he says that trust is a specific state that exists when both are willing to change their behavior to benefit the other. And I ask you, what are you willing to change to recreate the trust in our community? The third level of building community is really the psychodynamic level. And in this psychodynamic level, Byrne talks about a couple of things. He talks about imago, He talks about transference. He talks about transactions. And I have added personal authority. Because based on transference, you actually get a position of personal authority if you want it or not. So, luckily, from the science of community building, we know a lot about how to build cohesion at that level. We know how to build positive transference and a sense of true cohesion. Byrne called cohesion the will of the members that the organization survives. And sometimes I wonder, with all the different associations that are being created in different countries, if people really have the will for one organization to survive. And that is the question I am asking of you. Do you have the will for one organization to survive? From the science, we know that there are different ways of creating that sense. There's interpersonal attraction theory, which I won't go into. There's social identity theory, Teifel. But there's also what we call a social exchange theory by Thibault. And I find that theory quite interesting. It's very, very close to the way that Byrne also described transactions. Byrne was very busy with finding formulas for different concepts, from formulating relationships. And Thibault did the same thing with creating cohesion in communities. They said, if the cost is greater than the benefit, people will leave. But it depends on 3 factors. People will stay if there are no alternatives, if your investment in the organization is low anyway, and they will stay if they have low expectations. So, what does that mean for our TA associations? I ask you. Can we increase the benefit of our association and our community and lower the cost? Can we ask people to invest more so that the cohesion is greater? Because my sense is the contracts we make with our members are quite unilateral. It is not a bilateral contract. And that means people are not investing at the same rate as they're getting. Would that be a way to increase the cohesion? Is there a way to increase the expectations of people so that they stay? This is my question to you. And the bigger question, of course, is, can we use social psychology to actually increase the level of cohesion in our community? I end with the fact that I believe that we should invest in recreating a community of cooperation. And that with the science and the concepts we have at our fingertips today, it is possible. My question to you is, are you willing to go on that journey with me? Thank you very much.